Well, it's a snowy day outside today, so it seems like a good day to be installing some aftermarket heated seats in the back of my Passat. So along with that, I'm going to be installing a USB port for the back seat. So follow along today, and we're going to get this installed. This will be hopefully helpful whether or not you're doing this in a Passat. This is going to kind of walk through the process involved, whether you're doing front or rear seats, whether it's a Passat or something else. I'll show you how it's done. I'll add links in the description for all this stuff. So please, I get so many comments of people asking, where do I find this stuff? And I always put links in the description. So before you comment, where did you get this stuff? Just check out the links in the description below. I promise they'll be there. Maybe eventually they won't work. Sometimes that happens where a listing goes away, but I will definitely add links so you can easily find this stuff. So here's the heated seat kit, and these run about $45. They're practically free. That's just not a lot of money to spend on these things. So this kit has 2 pads for one side and 2 for the other. So for the bottom and the back. So we got everything to do the back seat, and then all the wiring. Everything's all plugged in as it comes, and we'll have to unplug this as we install it. But you can get different formations of this. I like this one with just the dials for left and right. So there's a bit of depth to it. So depending on your application, you just need to find a spot where you can stick this in and have that much mounting depth. And then there's a 15 amp fuse in a fuse holder here. There's a relay. And then we've got our wires. So this is very easy to hook up. The way that this one is wired is we've got our battery wires here, negative and positive, which of course do not need to go directly to the battery, but they can. And then we've got, and I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know for sure on this, but I believe that this yellow one goes to accessory power. So you can hook up these cables here, specifically this red one can be hooked to a constant 12 volts. And then over here, we've got our yellow one, which would go to an accessory so that the seats will turn off when you turn the car off, whether they're left on or not. As long as this is switched accessory power, they will go on and off of the car. And then this last red wire here is for the illumination for the switch, wherever the switch is in this mess, there's the switch. So that's just for the backlight on that. And so honestly, what I usually do is I as long as you find a good enough power source, I usually hook all 3 of these to a switched accessory power source, and then you can ground this wherever. So that simplifies the wiring a little bit. So basically what that means is the backlight will always be on whenever the car is on, and the seats will always work whenever the car is on. The only reason that you would want to hook the battery wire straight to the battery or to a different source is if you cannot find a power source that can support this accessory. So I'm going to do my best to find a power source that can support it all so that it simplifies the wiring. So there's the seat kit. And then we move over here. Here's some additional things. One of them is going to be my USB port I'm adding in the back. And this particular one, this is a pretty nice one. It's an aluminum housing, and it's actually got 2 USB ports, 2 regular USB ports, USB, I don't know if that's A, and then we've got USB-C right in the middle. So there's actually 3 ports on this. So yeah, so that's that. And then, and this will get wired right in with the power for that. So there again, I need to make sure I find, a decent power source for all that. But that's what we got going on over there. And then here I've got some fuse taps, and I just bought a bag with a bunch of them because, I need these more frequently than not. You of course can buy just one, but I'll put a link in for this exact bag that I got off of Amazon. So that's what I'm starting out with here. So we're going to start pulling the back seats out of the car, and there's 2 distinct parts to this project. One of them, of course, is getting the pads installed in the seat, and then the other is all the wiring, and they're both kind of equally big, so that, they're obviously both a necessary part, but they're both big projects. So you can even tackle one part one day and one part the other day. Everything just plugs in. You can see the plugs on the pads here. So if you don't have time to tackle it all in one day, you can definitely get all the pads installed one day and then do the wiring the next or whatever. I'm going to be knocking this all out in one shot here. One more thing I forgot to mention to add to the list here is some wire. I've got some 14 gauge 2-strand wire here. I don't know when I bought this, so you can just search for yourself, but this is copper 14 gauge 2-strand wire, and that will of course be necessary to get everything wired from the fuse box or wherever, or the battery, back to all the wiring for the heated seats and the USB port here. So the back is obviously configured a little bit differently than the front. Normally for the front, I don't always, but almost always, I pull the seat out to install the heated seat pads. And then of course, you pull the seat out, you put both pads in, you put it back in. Well, the back is a little easier in some ways because we can pull the bottom out and we can get the right and the left pads installed in one shot. And then for the back of the seat, this is a 60-40 split, so we're going to be pulling these two seat backs out independently and then installing the pads there. So for starters, we're going to pop the bottom out. There are, I believe, 4 fastening points, and if we just give it a good pull, we can get the first 2 done, and then I think there's hooks on the side here. If we push back, we can unhook those. There we go. And we should be able to, maybe we didn't get that one. There we go. Now we can remove the whole bottom just like that. So it's very easy to remove the bottom. So hopping in the car here, right between the 60-40 split, we've got a single T30 fastener in here. So we're gonna zip that screw out of there, and then we've got, if I can do it one-handed, we've got a cap here, and this, I believe, captures the 2 seats, the pivot points right in there. And we're gonna get both of these seats out with just simply removing that one T30 screw. Okay, so I've got the bracket popped out, and then once we lift up this side, there's just a peg that slides in to the seat, actually. The peg is on the car side and slides into the seat. So there we go, we've got that side out. And then the other side should be just as easy. Okay, so now we have removed both the bottom and the back with only using one T30 bit and taking 1 screw out. So that would be why you would want to remove these instead of trying to do anything in the car. Plus the wiring is going to be easy because we're going to be feeding the wiring under the carpet to the center console here. So this is not my first time installing heated seats and USB ports in the back of a Passat. So it's a little bit of cheating here because I already know how I'm going about this, but I'm going to be installing the switches and the USB port not really in my favorite spot, but it's a spot that works. And that spot is right here, kind of the downward facing section of the center console. I don't love that spot because it's not very visible, but if you know this stuff is there, it doesn't exactly matter. And as far as the USB ports go, it's a good spot because you're not going to spill anything into the ports. So although it's not my favorite, it's the spot that they basically need to go in this application. So we're gonna take this cover off, which requires no tools. There we go. And then the spot, like I said, we're gonna be putting them is right here. And if you look, there's a nice big opening back here, which allows enough depth for the heated seat switch as well as the USB port. So that's where they're gonna go in this application. And then our wiring is gonna get run under the carpet. We're gonna find a spot where it isn't gonna get pinched by anything, and we're gonna run it up here. And we're gonna have to loosen up the console a little bit to run all the wiring through and then up to the fuse box. Here we go. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit with the razor blade, just taking some of the plastic that, you know, didn't get pulled off in my cutting. So we're gonna clean it up a little bit, but I've got these both to fit. And basically what I used here is a combination of Unibits, a carbide burr on a die grinder, and an air saw. So those things worked out pretty good. Obviously the round hole for the cigarette lighter type plug with USB ports in it, I just used the Unibit to cut that out, but then it wasn't quite big enough, so I cleaned it out the rest of the way with a carbide burr. And then the air saw worked out good for cutting out the hole for the heated seat switches. So here's the finished product with the switches and the USB ports installed. And you can see there's just enough room, which is actually pretty impressive. There's quite a bit of room back there. That's a pretty big switch assembly. And then, so those worked out pretty good. I'm probably gonna put a dab of RTV in the back. Everything's nice and solid, but I'd like it to stay that way, and that's a real easy way that's not permanent to ensure that. You can always cut through it if you do need to remove the switch, but it's gonna keep anything from moving on its own. And then the other thing worth mentioning is that there's this cover for the USB port that I opted not to use. So before I put this in, I removed this from it. Some of the reasons you might want to use this is if this is aimed up and you're worried about stuff getting in it. In this case, it's actually aimed down, so I'm not worried about that. And the other thing is, I don't know exactly how this one lights up, but they usually do light up. I'm imagining this one does. And so like if you put this in the middle of your dash, you might not like that. It might be a little bit bright at night, and that would be a situation where you'd want the cover over it so that you don't have to look at those lights. If it was a situation like in my truck where I replaced a cigarette lighter with this, and so this produced quite a bit of light, and when I wasn't using it, I just wanted it to be covered up and not lit. I've pulled a few panels off here. I've pulled the panel off that runs along the side of the center console all the way up to the front. I've taken the panel off from down below the dash here. I've pulled the cover off to get to the fuse box, and then I've taken the 4 screws out, 2 on each side of the center console, which does not mean the center console is free to be removed, but that should get us as far as we need to go. We have some room to move it now. You can see I can lift up on it pretty easily and get a little bit of room. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift it up, and then I can kind of sneak under the carpet here. I'm gonna use a coat hanger and feed it through. I've got my wires run up to the fuse box here, and I ran 2 separate wires, and I was planning on tapping 2 separate circuits just to spread out the load. However, I was testing 30 amp and 40 amp circuits. There's several 30 amp, there's one 40 amp, and that's what I started with. And in the end, I didn't want to go with anything lower. I did actually end up testing the 20 amp circuits as well, and the only switch circuit I even found was this 30 amp here. So I've got the 30 amp in the factory slot of the fuse tap, and then I've got the 20 amp in the output side that goes to the 2 circuits I've added. I'm gonna test the load once I get everything up and running, but for now, that's what I did because that was the only switched circuit I found. So it wasn't exactly how I wanted to do it, but it's gonna work out. I'm gonna test it and verify that it's not gonna put too much load. It's time now to get the heating pads installed in the seats because we've got our wiring back here. There we've got our USB plug and our seat heater switches. So yeah, that's what we're on to now is getting the pads in the seats, and then we can throw those back in and we'll be up and running. We're gonna start with the bottom here, and I'm just gonna go right in the back, and we've got these 2 rows of hog rings. So I'm gonna just use a wire cutters to help extract those. And then I've got my bin of hog rings and a hog ring pliers to put it all back together once I've got the pads installed. So now that we've got these hog rings off and got it opened up, we've got another row inside here with 3 hog rings on it. And in the past, what I've done is I have, in some cases, not reinstalled these hog rings to run the seat heater through here, but it sort of depends on the positioning. And this positioning looks like this is all pretty much gonna be more or less under the back. So if I can just get the pad, there might be another row somewhere in here of hog rings holding this down. but we're gonna see how far I can reach up in here and how far I can make the pad, and then I'm gonna cut the pad to length and we'll tuck it in. I am gonna need to cut these 3 hog rings out in order to feed the pad through, and then we'll reinstall hog rings there when we're done. So as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking that I'm going to skip the hog rings here, and I'm just gonna start the pad right up in the front here, you know, cut some off, and then I'm gonna run it, drop it down into that channel below the bar in the upholstery, and then right back up, just so we have full heating elements in here. Technically, this might not be pulled down as tight, because that's what this is doing, is holding this down here, holding this down here. But I don't think that you're actually going to be able to notice. I don't think there's going to be any downside to skipping those hog rings. So that is the way that I'm going to address this seat, is I'm going to skip those hog rings, just run the heated seat pad from this joint all the way back, and have the wire come out in the back there. All right, so I obviously time-lapsed that one. So what I did is I stuck the pad in, and I failed to mention that there's adhesive. The adhesive is on the foam side. So this pad would get flipped over and stuck down to the foam. So that's what I did over here, and it worked out well. The pad comes right to the back here with the way I did it. Again, I'm skipping the hog rings here, but you can't tell it's in there. It laid really flat. But I think what I'm going to do on this one is I think I'm going to peel this. Sometimes I'll kind of start to peel it and then fish it in there and then reach in and pull the paper off. Well, the paper likes to tear as much as, I don't know how much you could tell with the time lapse, but I fought with it a little bit. I wound up pulling it back out, peeling one side off, tucking it back in, and struggling with the other side. So on this side, I think I'm just going to peel all the paper off and just shove it in there and get it tucked in, and we should be good to go. Now, one other thing is you can cut a whole bunch more hog rings off, and you can basically peel the upholstery completely off if you want to. I usually don't have to struggle with it that much, so I kind of prefer to just do the minimum and just reach in there and stick it down. Okay, so that side definitely went quicker, just peeling it off before putting it in. So now we've got both of the pads at the bottom here. So what we can do is we can flip this back over again, and we can install the hog rings. I'm probably just gonna time lapse that again. Pretty easy to do, but yeah, that's where we're at. And I'm just gonna probably run these wires. Well, maybe I'll run these out the middle here, kind of by the seat belts, but all the wiring is gonna be in the middle. So I think we'll do that for these, and that should work out pretty well. So I've done this before, but I don't remember exactly how this seat goes together. But I would just like to mention, this car's just really in nice shape. It's got 180,000 miles on it, but this is what sold me on it, is like these back seats look like nobody ever sat in them. So anyways, so nothing like tearing apart a good seat. So we've got, it kind of feels like, you know, almost it could be like wood, plywood, some really hard cardboard or something on the back. But we've got like a joint all the way around it, and I think if I pull on this, okay, this isn't an uncommon, I don't know what this is called, but it's like a tongue-in groove with plastic type of thing. Okay, so we got that side, and I'm not sure. We can kind of work it out from around the mounting point there. Okay, and the same thing along the bottom. And let's see if that gets us where we need to be, or if we need to. Okay, maybe we can. Okay, so it is actually metal. This whole plate is metal, and maybe we're just gonna wind up pulling this thing. It was years ago. I did this on my last one, so like I said, I couldn't remember. Okay, so, you know, I probably have, we've got a row, it looks like we've got a row of hog rings down each side, but I probably have enough access right now to sneak the pad up in there. So I think that's what we're gonna try and do. We're not gonna take it apart any more than we have to, and we should be able to sneak the pad up there. I'm gonna do real time here so you can see what's going on as I clip this back together. When I got the pad in here, here's the wire. I cut a little hole and just fed it out. That's towards the center where all the other wiring is gonna be. So now we're just pushing this tongue and groove, whatever the official name is, I don't know, back into the seat. So you just kind of line it up and give it a good shove, and it pops right back in there pretty easily. So we got one side left. And we want to make sure also that we get our little mounting knob through the hole. You just kind of feel it and hear it click in, and we're good to go. Okay, I've got the back seat bolted back in with that single bolt. Here's my two wires. You just want to make sure that as you flip the seat down and up, that they're not going to get pinched anywhere or interfere with anything, and mine are good. And then I know from past experience that there's different colors of wires on these harnesses, and these two have red wires and these two have yellow wires. I know the yellow goes to the left side, so we want to make sure that this being, well, as I threw that onto the right side. So I'm holding the right side one, so we want to make sure that we get the right side connector for the back to one of these, as well as the right side front pad. So it would obviously be a mistake if you hooked up these two to these two and those two to the bottom pads, because they wouldn't be operating correctly. So make sure you get everything plugged in right, and then we're just going to slap the lower cushion back in here and plug that in when we do it. And then we're going to make sure that these wires don't get pinched under anything. I don't think there's too much metal under the seat that sits firmly on anything. I think it's around the edge and around the front, and then it kind of tucks into the back there. But we just want to make sure nothing gets pinched. If you need to, you can throw some zip ties on them to secure everything, and even a piece of tape along the sheet metal here. Just make sure it doesn't get pinched, and then we're going to turn them on and make sure it all works. All right, here's the finished product. It turned out really nice. Sitting here enjoying the heated seat. So there you have it. Hopefully that helps you figure out how to get the universal seat heaters installed in your own vehicle or in a Passat like mine. But yeah, definitely worth the money. A little bit of a project, but well worth it.